Hey guys, it's Adrian back at it again with another Commander Deck Tech. Today we're going to be talking about Anzrag the Quake Mole. Now this is actually one of my favorite Commander decks. I'm pretty excited to talk about it at length here in this video. Anzrag is a 4-mana 8/4, no downsides. When he becomes blocked, you're going to untap all your creatures, including this one, and then there's going to be an extra combat. And you can pay 7 mana to make it so that he has to be blocked this combat if able. Or each combat this turn if able. That's important. So, obviously, our whole deck is going to be about making it so that Anzrag has to be blocked. That's very important to the deck. And having a lot of things that do cool stuff when they attack is also super important. So, we're going to talk about this deck a lot, but I want to talk about some ground rules first. So, this is a somewhat casual deck. It does not have a lot of the fast mana that you might expect. There's no Gaia's Cradle. There's no Ancient Tomb. There's no Soul Ring, and there's no Deflecting Swat because my other play group kind of likes to keep it low on the amount of free spells. So if you're wondering, wow, all those cards would be great in this deck, you are 100% right, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, but they're not in this deck because it is conforming to a little bit more of a casual play style. That being the case, it is a pretty strong deck, and I do play it a lot. And I'm actually somewhat in the process of, pimping the deck out to make it look really nice. So, anyway, I'm really excited to talk about it, so let's get right into it. We'll start with the 1-drops. We got Delighted Halfling. I'm going to take it out of the sleeve so you can see it a little bit better. I think that the inside sleeve is a little crappy. Here, I'll take it all the way out. All right, there we go. So, Delighted Halfling, 1 mana, 1/2. Adds a colorless mana, and then you can add 1 mana of any color, and if it's on a legendary spell, it can't be countered. So obviously this is going to be really nice with our commander. Making it so it can't be countered is very, very nice because we need our commander out to really do the things that we want to do with this deck. So Delighted Halfling, making it so it can't be countered is really nice. Next up, we've got Ragavan, Nimble Pilfer. Again, this sleeve is a little dirty, but Ragavan, when he deals combat damage to a player, you're going to make a treasure token, then exile the top card of their deck until the end of turn. You can cast it. You do have to have the right colors, but the treasure kind of helps with that. And then you can dash this in. So this is just a good way to get down on turn 1, ramp your general out a little bit quicker than you otherwise would be able to. We're not a Ragavan deck, but we are a deck that likes to have creatures do cool stuff when they hit players, and this definitely fits the bill. So running a Ragavan. Oh, and if you are ultra budget, you could swap this out for Captain Lantern Storm, and it's not nearly as good, but it's kind of similar. Next up, we got Orcish Lumberjack. This is a card I actually pulled on my channel during a Mystery Booster. 1 mana, you sack a forest, and then you're going to add 3 mana. So this is really our only way of getting our general out super, super fast, like turn 2, because we're not running the busted fast mana. But this is a little bit more balanced because you do have to sacrifice forest, and that can kind of add up over time. Also, like most fast mana, this is just an awful, abysmal top deck. But your hope is that you get it out in the early game, and then you can ramp out some of your big stuff. Speaking of which, we've also got Birds of Paradise. Classic, you probably know what this does. Just adds 1 mana of any color. It's really good, helps us get our general out faster. Next up, we have a card that has Birds of Paradise on the art, but this is Concordant Crossroads. Enchant World, you don't really need to worry about that. It just means that this sits out there and affects everybody's creatures. So creatures get haste. Every creature on the board gets haste, including yours, your opponent's, everybody's creature has haste. So it's pretty nice to be able to swing with your general the turn that he comes out and all of your big stuff. And the downside of your opponent's creatures having haste really isn't that big of a deal. Since our creatures are so huge and imposing, we don't really worry about our opponent's creatures all that much. Smuggler's Surprise. This is technically not 1 mana, but it's got Spree. So you got to pay 1, and then you can add more to the mana cost. If you add 2, you mill 4 cards, and then you can put up to 2 creatures or lands from among those cards that you milled into your hand. So nice way to refill. If you pay 5 extra, you can put 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. And if you pay just 1 extra, your creatures with power 4 or greater gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So it's kind of like Heroic Intervention, but it has some extra upsides because you can do the mill thing if you run out of cards, and then you can also do the cheat your creatures into play thing if you have big creatures in your deck, which obviously this deck runs a lot of huge creatures. So we can really make good use out of all the modes on that. Definitely a great card. Next up, we just got Lightning Bolt. It's 1 mana, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. This is really nice for dealing with things that are really annoying for us to deal with. As for Sentinels, things that are drawing your opponent's extra cards, things that give your opponent protection, anything like that, anything that is exiling your Anzrag or threatens to exile or destroy your Anzrag. Lightning Bolt's just really efficient, so we're going to run that. Now, moving up to the 2-drops, we've got Sylvan Library. Again, I have a pretty cool version of this, but the inside sleeve makes it look kind of crappy on camera. But at the beginning of your draw step, you can basically draw 2 extra cards, and you got to pay 4 life if you want to keep them. So this is nice. A lot of the time we will pay 8 life and not really care about it all that much because we really just need as many cards as we can. We got some ramp here, 3 visits. Just go get a forest and put it into play. It comes into play untapped, which is kind of nice. Nothing really much to say about this other than that it's a full art foil, which is cool. But we're just playing this to ramp. Heroic Intervention. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible. Super, super important to this deck. Our creatures are massive. And our general is extremely important. Also, we can kind of do a neat little trick with Heroic that most other decks can't do, which is that if our general gets blocked by a creature when it's attacking, by something with Death Touch or something that would kill it, you can do this, untap it, get your extra combat. So not only is Heroic Intervention just such a good card, we would want to play it anyway, but it's even better than it normally is in most decks in this specific deck. Next up, Farseek, go get a land that's not a basic force and put it into play. We run some dual lands, so this is pretty nice. Another ramp card, Nature's Lore. It's basically the same thing as 3 visits, so we don't really need to talk about it again. Tibalt's Trickery. Now, this is nice. It has a lot of words on it, but basically you're going to counter a spell and then pick 1, 2, or 3 at random, and then the controller of that spell is going to mill 1, 2, or 3 cards, and then exile the top card of their deck until they had a non-land with a different name. So in Commander, this basically says, counter that, you can have something else. It's nice for when people are trying to combo off. This is a nice little safety valve for you to have. But also, if somebody is aiming removal at Anzrag or casting a board wipe, we're probably just going to want them to have some other card. And, hopefully they spin into just like an Arcane Signet or something that's not that important. And most people aren't expecting counter spells in red or green. Next up, we got Fanatic of Ronis. It's a 2-drop to 1/4, which is a nice little body. It's going to add 1 green. If you have Ferocious, it's going to have 4 green, which is pretty wild. And you can only do that if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. And it does have Eternalize for 4, which means if it dies or whatever, you can bring it back for 4 as a 4/4 token copy of itself, basically. So Ferocious, obviously, with our general and the Eternalize is pretty trivial to get in this deck. So a lot of times this is just a 2-mana creature that taps for 4, which is kind of insane, actually. Next up, I got the cool Secret Lair for Rampant Growth. Just go get it basically and put it into play tapped. We obviously want to jump from 2 to 4, so that's why we're running all of these 2-mana ramp cards. Next up, we got Hajar, Loyal Bodyguard. This is a 3/3. You can sacrifice it at any time to give legendary creatures you control +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. Nice way to save our Anzrag and give it indestructible if we're going off with combat steps. And we also run a bunch of other legendary creatures in this deck. What did I say? Bunch of Udger? That's not a word. We run a bunch of other legendaries in this deck, so +1/+0 indestructible for free. It's pretty nice. Speaking of which, with Ramp, we have Sakura Tribe Elder. I have the cool F&M promo from way back in the day. This is from 2009. Damn, it's pretty old. Just helps us get from 2 to 4. You probably know what that card does. Swiftfoot Boots. In this deck, we don't run Lightning Greaves because we want to run a lot of ways to target our own commander in this deck. So we just run Swiftfoot Boots. If you feel like running both, you could run both, but I think just one is fine. Moving up to the 3-drops, we've got Crows and Grip. This is the Mystical Archives version, but it's got split second. It can't really be responded to. And you're going to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Very important. Super good card. It should pretty much be in all your green decks. Next up, we got Mithril Coat. This has Flash and Indestructible. This is kind of our sub-out for Lightning Greaves because when this enters, you can attach it to a legendary creature you control for free, and it gives equipped creature Indestructible, which is really nice for our Anzrag. So that's usually who we're going to put that on. Next up, we've got Fight Rigging. When this comes into play, you're going to exile one of the top 5 cards of your deck and put it under this. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you get a 1/1 counter on a creature, and then if you control a creature with power 7 or greater, you get to play that card for free, which is really cool. It's very easy to get to cast this free card because obviously our general has 8 power, which is more than 7, but we also run another bunch of huge creatures, and when you're taking a bunch of extra combats, you're actually going to get this +1/+1 counter at the beginning of each of the extra combats. So it's got a lot of synergy with the deck. You definitely want to run that card for sure. Next up, speaking of synergy, we've got Invasion Plans. This is a weird card. It's 3 mana. It's an enchantment. Each creature, so that's every creature, all the creatures, block whenever they are able. So that includes yours. And whoever is attacking gets to pick how the creature's blocked. So this is pretty cool with Anzrag. It helps you get there with his extra combat steps much easier. All right, next up we got Lore. This has a ton of words on it, but basically it's an aura, and you're going to put it onto a creature, and then that creature has to be blocked by everything that can block it. So if you throw it on Anzrag is going to have to be blocked by everything, and that's going to make it so that if you pair this with Indestructible or whatever, you can pretty much just wipe the entire board and take a bajillion extra combat steps. It's a very cool card, and I love the Phil Foglio art. I'm a big fan of the old school Phil Foglio goofy art, so I definitely respect this card, and it is great in this deck. Next up, we got Obscuring Haze. This is the one free commander spell that is not banned in my play group because it's kind of bad, but it's actually pretty sweet in this deck. If you control your commander, which often we will, you can cast it for free, and it is going to prevent all damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures your opponents control, but not your creatures. So nice for countering a little bit of a Crater Hoof action on your opponent's turn, but it's also another way of giving our commander sort of indestructible, kind of, and making it so that he can swing a bunch of times more easily. Next up, we got Shadow in the Warp. First creature you cast each turn is going to cost 2 less to cast, which is really cool. And whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, it does 2 damage to them. So, unfortunately, it doesn't do 2 damage to them every time they cast a non-creature spell. That would be pretty cool. But the cost reduction and the chip damage is really nice on this card. It's from one of the weird Warhammer sets, and I think it's kind of expensive. So if you don't have it, it's not super necessary, but it is a really good card to have. Next up, we got Eternal Witness, classic card. Enters the battlefield, get a card back from your graveyard, put it in your hand. I got this in-store play promo. Nothing much to say about this. It's just really good. It's a green card, green staple. Next up, we got Roar of Challenge. It's a 3-cost sorcery. All creatures able to block target creature this turn have to do so. And if you control a power or 4 or greater creature, that creature that you target with this is going to be indestructible. So this is a good way to combo off with your general. Obviously, if you target it, it's going to be indestructible because its power is much greater than 4, and everything has to block it. So it's kind of like a lure and an indestructible effect on one card, which makes it really, really strong in this deck. And once we get to the creatures that have all the really, really good attack triggers, you'll see why these effects are so good in this deck. Next up, we got Rhythm of the Wild. Creature spells you control can't be countered, which is very nice for all of our big things. And non-token creatures you control have Riot, which means they either come in with a +1/+1 counter or haste. So a lot of times we're just going to pick haste with this. Unless somebody has a Blind Obedience or something like that, there's really not that big of a reason to give things 1/1 counters, just because our stuff is so big to begin with. But the Riot is a nice upside on that. Making your things not be able to be countered is really strong too. Next up, we got Beast Within. Nice foil here. Pretty simple card. 3 mana instant. Destroy any permanent, including lands. And they're going to get a 3/3 Beast, which we don't really care about. In fact, having creatures that have to block Anzrag is almost kind of an upside in this deck, weirdly enough. So this is a pretty great removal spell for this deck. It has synergy. You can blow up anything. It's a green card. Green staple. We're going to run that. Entish Restoration. I'm running this in place of like a Cultivate or whatever. You're going to sack a land, and then you're going to go get 2 basic land cards and put them into the battlefield tapped. So it's kind of like a Harrow in that respect, or Harrow, or however you say that. But if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, instead you're going to get 3 basic lands and put them into the battlefield tapped. So that's really cool. With all of our big stuff, it's kind of a no-brainer. Next up, we've got Solvala, Heart of the Wilds, 3 mana, 2/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller can draw a card if its power is the greatest power on the board. And then you can pay 1 and then tap this to make X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So a lot of times, if you play this on 3, you're going to draw a card whenever this guy enters because he's got 8 power. And then this can tap for 8 mana, which is just nuts. So obviously that's a really good card in this deck. Chaos Warp, classic red card. Shuffle a permanent into their deck. We're running red and green, so we don't have the best removal. And obviously counter spells were pretty limited. We just run Tybalts. So having some of these catch-all 3-mana answers is pretty important in the deck, I think. Next up, we got a new card. This is Hauntwood's Shrieker, 3 mana, 3/3. Whenever it attacks, we're going to manifest Dread, which means we're going to look at the top 2 cards of our deck and put one of them face down on the battlefield as a 2/2. And then you can pay 2 mana to reveal a face down permanent. If it's a creature card, you can turn it face up. So that's kind of a nice way to cheat on the mana cost. You put like a giant 6 mana creature into play with this attack trigger, pay 2 mana at instant speed. Now it's a, whatever it actually is supposed to be on the card side of it. So this is a sweet card. It's got a lot of synergy with the deck. The attack trigger is really nice. So I'm trying it out. I haven't played many games with this specific build of the deck, with this new card in it, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty cool. Next up, we have Triumph of the Hordes. Kind of a salty card for most people, but your creatures are going to get +1/+1, trample, and infect. So this makes killing the entire table super easy. If Anzrag is taking multiple combat steps, he's going to be 9 power just with this and the card itself. That makes it super easy if you're taking extra combat steps. So kind of a salty card. Not everybody likes it, but I like it. And I'm running this in place of Craterhoof Behemoth, so I'm okay with that. Next up, we got Helana and Elena, the partners. 2/3 for 4. First strike, reach at the beginning of combat on your turn. You're going to put some counters on something where X is the power of this card, and then that creature is going to gain haste until end of turn. So this is a nice way to pump our big creatures even more and give them haste, which is pretty strong. Also, if we can pump this, then it gets even more counters, it gets even more crazy. And we got this cool, black and white bordered foil. So I like this card. And also, it triggers on each combat that you take. So if you're taking a bunch of extra combats, stuff's going to get really, really big. Next up, we've got Toski, Bearer of Secrets. I think this is the Bloomborough special guest version. Can't be countered. It's only a 1/1, but it's got indestructible. It has to attack each combat if able. And whenever our creatures deal combat damage to a player, we get to draw a card. So when we're taking our extra combats, this is really good. Drawing a ton of extra cards is really nice. Speaking of 4-mana things that draw cards, Guardian Project. Basically, whenever a non-token creature enters, if it's got a different name, which it will because it's commander, we're going to draw a card. So just drawing a card onto all of our big stuff is really, really good in this deck. Speaking of big stuff, we got 4-mana Goreclaw, Terror of Qualsisma. Creature spells with power 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast, and there's no restriction on that, so you can cast a bunch of stuff for much cheaper. And whenever this attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater, including itself, gets +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. So this can, re-trigger a bunch of different times on your turn if you're using it in the combat combo area of the deck. But mostly, it's just really nice to be able to cast our commander for 2 cheaper. Being able to cast our commander for 2 mana or 4 mana if it's died once, 6 mana if it's died twice. That's just a really nice discount on top of all the other big creatures we have in the deck. You can't see this because of the crazy foiling on it, but let me pull it out of the sleeve here. It's in a weird double super ultra wrappy sleeve. So this is Unnatural Growth. 5 mana at the beginning of each combat, including your opponent's combats. You're going to double the power and toughness of all your creatures. So when you're taking extra combats with this card, it gets really stupid really fast. So, Anzrag, he's going to be swinging in with 16 power. And then if you take an extra combat, it's going to be 32. And then 64. So it's pretty wild. And it's also a nice defensive card because it buffs your creatures on your opponent's turns too. Next we got You Look Upon the Tarrasque. This is a wild card. I don't really know why it's instant, but it is. 5 mana. you're probably not ever going to run this in any deck other than this deck, probably. 5 mana, choose one. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to you and creatures you control this turn. If you're playing this as a 5 mana fog, that's not very good. But the second part is pretty good. Target creature gets +5/+5, indestructible, and all creatures your opponents control, able to block, has to block. So this is another way, basically, of playing this Roar of Challenge card. Indestructible, has to be blocked. This is another copy of that. And the fact that it combines the has to be blocked with the indestructible is really strong. This +5/+5 really doesn't matter all that much because our guy is so big anyway, but making it even larger is pretty cool. So a lot of times you're going to get out some attack trigger creatures. You're going to slap this down on Anzrag and you're going to win the game. So it's pretty cool. Xenagos, God of Revels. 5 mana, 6/5, indestructible. If your devotion to red and green is not 7 or more, he is not a creature. So he gives you 2 devotion. Anzrag gives you 2. It's pretty easy to get to 7. But at the beginning of combat in your turn, regardless of whether this is a creature or not, another target creature you control gets +X/+X and haste, where X is that creature's power. So again, kind of like the unnatural growth, just doubling the power and toughness of things every combat, including all their extra combats, is nuts. And giving things haste is also really nice. So this is a really awesome card for this deck. Honestly, at the original build of this, I had this as the commander. But then Anzrag came out, and I was like, holy crap, that's way better. So definitely a good card in the 99, though. Next up, we got Karlach, Fury of Avernus. This card went up for some reason. I think it's because people think this chick is hot in the video game. I never played the video game, but, she kind of looks like a red demon girl. So that's pretty cool. But anyway, it's 5 mana for a 5/4 whenever you attack. If it's the first combat phase of your turn, untap all your attacking creatures. They get first strike until the end of turn. And then at the end of that combat, there's an additional combat. So this is a nice way to get at least one additional combat. If we're going to be taking a bunch of extra combats, this is just another one in there. But giving all your guys first strike can be pretty cool too. That choose a background, that doesn't matter because we don't have backgrounds in this deck. But guaranteeing while this is out that we're going to be getting additional combats is pretty cool. So good card for the deck. Another 5 mana card, Doors of Durin. Weird card. 5 mana legendary artifact. Whenever you attack, you're going to get to scry 2. And then you could reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a creature, you put it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And then it gets trample if you control a dwarf, which I don't think we have any. And hexproof if you control an elf, which we might have like 1. But we don't really care about that. What we do care about is every time we swing, we're going to get to cheat cards into play. And you'll be surprised at the crazy big creatures you can get into play with this. So it's a really good card, even though it looks kind of weird. Glorybringer, 4 mana or 5 mana, 4/4 flying haste. You can exert it when it attacks, which means that it doesn't untap on your untap step. And if you do that, it deals 4 damage to target non-dragon creature an opponent controls. Now, when you're taking extra combats with Anzrag, Anzrag says untap each creature you control. This does not have a stun counter on it. That was before stun counters were a thing. It just says it doesn't untap during your next untap. So Anzrag will untap this, your extra combats. And what that means is if you have this out, you can exert it every single time you attack with it. So you're just shooting down all the creatures. You can exert this 3-4 times in a turn, and that is pretty wild. But, keep in mind, it won't untap during your next untapped step, and I think those exerts stack. I could be wrong about that. But likely, if you're going to be doing this 3 or 4 or 5 times in a turn, you're going to be pretty happy with that anyway. Next up, we got Elder Gargaroth. It's a 5 mana 6/6, Vigilance, Reach, Trample. And whenever it attacks or blocks, you're going to get to pick one of these things. You're going to make a 3/3 beast, gain 3 life, or draw a card. So obviously this is a great attack trigger to just keep going over and over again with Anzrag. You're going to be drawing the cards, making the beast, gaining the life. So this is just a great attack trigger. And you can use it defensively too, but with the vigilance, it can be kind of nice with the blocking. But mostly we're just playing that for the sweet, sweet attack trigger. Next up, we got Roxanne, like that song. Starfall Savant, 5 mana. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you're going to make these weird meteorite tokens that say when they enter, you get to do 2 damage to any target, but they do come in tapped, and then they add 1 mana when they become untapped. And whenever you tap an artifact token for mana, so these, you're going to add 1 mana of any type that mana produced. I don't know why I said that so badly, but you get the idea. So it enters, you're going to make this weird token that does 2 damage to something. Good for, picking off small creatures or finishing creatures off if they accrued some damage in combat, or, maybe you could go at your opponent's face. If that's your game plan. But mostly we're looking to just swing with this bad boy over and over again. Bad girl, whatever. Over and over again, and make those meteorites over and over, getting that 2 damage, getting that mana on our next turn. This is a sweet card. I wasn't running this for the longest time because I was running a little bit more of a competitive, not CDH, but I was running Jewel Lotus and all that crap. And obviously, because a lot of those cards got banned, it freed up some room for some fun cards like this, so that's why it's in the deck. Next up, we got Return of the Wild Speaker. We're either going to draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures we control, or our non-human creatures are going to get +3/+3. So, obviously, if we're drawing 8 cards with it or more, that's busted. We don't really use this +3/+3 mode that much. We mostly just want to draw the cards. We don't run a lot of humans, so it's kind of a no-brainer. Next up, speaking of creatures that aren't human, this is a 5-mana 4/4 Goldspan Dragon. Flying, haste, when it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you're going to make a treasure, and then your treasures can tap for more mana, basically. 2 mana instead of 1. So, pretty sweet card. Attacking over and over again, getting all those treasures. It can help you do a lot of really, really cool stuff. So, sweet card for the deck. Next up, we got Avabruck Caretaker. 6 mana cards now. 6 mana, 4/4, hexproof at the beginning of combat on your turn. So again, if we're taking extra combats, this will happen multiple times. You're going to get 2 1/1 counters on another target creature you control. It has day bound, so unfortunately the downside of playing this card is that you have to keep track of day or night. But when it's nighttime, it becomes a 6/6, hexproof. Everything else has hexproof. And you're going to put 2 counters on each creature you control each combat. So obviously, when this thing flips, it's just insane. But it's really, really good on the front half, too. So this is a strong card for the deck. Next up, we got Oliphant. This is a 6 mana, 6/4 with trample. Whenever it attacks, another target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. So again, another nice attack trigger to happen over and over again. But Mountain Cycling is the main reason why we're playing this. Sometimes we will play it as a 6 mana guy, and we'll be happy to have that. And we can cheat it into play with our Doors of Durin and stuff like that. But for the most part, we're just running this as sort of a land that counts as a creature because we can Mountain Cycle it away. Next up, we got Embercleave, 6 mana, flash, costs 1 less for each attacking creature, and then you get to put it on a creature for free when it comes in, and it gives creature +1/+1 and double strike and trample. So really nice way to just bonk somebody for 18 damage or more out of nowhere. Killing people with commander damage is pretty trivial when you have this card out, so pretty sweet card. Next up, we got Ravenous Tyrannosaurus. 6 mana, 6/6, devour 3, so you can sack creatures to put 3 counters on it each for each creature that you sack. And when it attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to up to 1 other target creature, and then excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. So obviously that's a really, really sweet attack trigger, and we're attacking a lot, so pretty good card for the deck. Next up, we got Season of Gathering from Bloomburrow. 6 mana, and it's got this weird paw print thing, but basically you can pick 5 paws worth of modes. Kind of cringy, but whatever. It's a really good card. The 1 paw mode is +1/+9 counter on a creature you control, and it gains vigilance and trample. So we can pick that 5 times if we want. We'll be pretty happy about that. And then 2 paw is choose target artifact or enchantment, destroy all permanents of that type. So we can wipe out all of the artifacts and enchantments and put a 1/1 counter on a thing. Or we can pay 3, and we're going to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures we control, which obviously is going to be pretty big. So any combination of this, if we're, drawing 8 cards, killing all the enchantments, drawing, a bunch of cards, putting counters on things, we're pretty happy with any combination of that. Next up, we got Kogla, the Titan Ape. It enters the battlefield. It's going to fight something, so nice removal. And when it attacks, you're going to destroy target artifact or enchantment, defending player controls. So really nice attack trigger. And finally, you can pay 2 mana and return a human you control to its owner's hand, and it gains indestructible. Looking through the deck, we really don't have that many humans. I guess that's a human. And obviously, Helena Lelena is a human. But the most powerful thing with the human aspect of that to do is just bounce Eternal Witness over and over again. And if you're doing that, you're probably winning the game, but it is a really nice line to be able to keep in mind when you play this card. Next up, we got Atali, Primal Storm. 6 mana, 6/6. Whenever it attacks, you're going to exile the top card of each player's library, and then you can cast any of those cards for free. So obviously, if you're getting this attack trigger once, twice, 8 times in one turn, you're probably going to win the game. So great card for the deck. I think this is some weird Target promo or something. I seem to remember that, but it's kind of a bizarre promo. Next up, we got Inferno Titan. 6 mana, 6/6, good boomer card all the way from back in M11. You can pay 1 mana to give him +1/+0, and when he enters the battlefield or attacks, you can do 3 damage split up however you want. So, enters the battlefield, can wipe out a bunch of stuff or a couple small things or just 1 3 mana or 3 toughness guy. But getting this attack trigger over and over again is really, really nice. Next up, this is technically 6 mana, but sometimes we'll pay it for 1 because it has Miracle. Revenge on the Hunted. I used to love this card when I was in Standard. I played a lot of janky decks with this. But it's going to give target creature +6/+6 trample, and all creatures have to block it. So another really, really nice way to combo with Anzrag. Moving on to 7 mana, we've got another Atali Primal Conqueror. This is a 7 mana, 7/7 this time. Trample. And when it enters the battlefield, each player exiles cards off the top of their deck until they hit a non-land card. And then you can cast all those cards for free. And if you pay 10 mana, Phyrexian on there, so 9 or 10 mana, you're going to transform it only as a sorcery. And on the back half, it is an 11/11 with Trample and Indestructible, and it basically has Infect. So pretty wild card on the back. We're mostly playing it for the front half. Being able to put this into play and cast a bunch of stuff is awesome. And because it has this weird green, identity on the back, you can only play this in Gruul decks, so you can't play it in your Rakdos decks or your Boros decks or anything like that. So obviously we want to take the advantage of that and play it in our Gruul deck. Next up, we got Ancient Bronze Dragon, another 7 mana big boy. Flying, whenever he deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20 and then put that many counters on something. Each of up to 2 target creatures. So this is a wild combat damage trigger. If you get this one time, you're probably going to win the game. But with Anzrag, yeah, you're going to be getting it multiple times. Next up, we got 8 mana. Skull Spore Nexus. Costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So with Anzrag, a lot of the time, we're going to be playing this for 2 mana, which is amazing. And whenever creatures of yours die, you're going to get these weird fungus tokens that are as big as the power of those creatures. And you can pay 2 mana and tap this to double target creature's power until end of turn. Gives us some nice protection against board wipe because you get this weird fungus dinosaur token thing. And also being able to double things' power is awesome. And a lot of the time, it's just going to be 2 mana. So I feel like it's a pretty good card for the deck. Next up, we got Galta. Stampede Tyrant, big ol' 8/8, 12/12 with Trample. And when it enters the battlefield, put all the creatures from your hand onto the battlefield. So if we can ramp this out, obviously we have a ton of huge creatures. So being able to cheat all of them into play is really sweet. But also it's just a big 12/12, Swing with it, win the game with it. Next up, we got 8 mana for this Stonehoof Chieftain. Trample Indestructible, 8 mana. Whenever another creature we control attacks, it gains Trample and Indestructible until end of turn. So really good way to give your commander Indestructible. This thing is big. It's hard to get rid of. It's chunky. It's huge. And the Trample is also really nice on that. Next up, we got Last March of the Ents. This card's nuts. 8 mana sorcery, can't be countered, which is great. And you're going to draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control. And then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield after you draw. So I wish it was power because Anzrag only has 4 toughness. But a lot of things that we run give things +X, where X is its power. So, and a lot of our creatures have big toughness. So This is just drawing us a butt ton of cards and putting a bunch of creatures into play. A lot of times if you cast this and then you don't get board wiped, you're going to win. Or if you have the Concordant Crossroads or, that thing that gives things haste, the Riot thing, then you're going to probably win the game right on the spot if you cast that a lot of the time. Next up, we got Great Henge. This card's expensive, but it's worth it. 9 mana, X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of creature or power of creatures. So it's kind of like Skull Spore Nexus in that regard. A lot of time we're going to be playing this for 2 mana. It taps for 2, and whenever we do that, we gain 2 life. And whenever creatures come into play that are not tokens, we're going to put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. This is an obviously crazy card. If you're playing a green deck and Commander, you should probably be playing it if you can afford to purchase it. And last but not least, we've got Ghalta, Primal Hunger. It's 12 mana, 12/12 trample, just like the other Ghalta. And it's going to cost X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. A lot of time, we're playing this for 2 mana, or 4, or 3. But 2, 3, 4, any of those for a 12/12 with trample is pretty crazy. So that's the last non-land card we run in the deck. Although, as I've done in all my other videos, we're going to talk about some MDFCs now because I count those as lands. And this deck runs a ton of MDFCs. It runs 5. So we got Turn Timber Symbiosis. Basically, look at the top 7, put a creature. If it's a small creature, it gets some counters. And if not, you just get the creature. So a lot of times I whiff with this and it pisses me off. But, we got the huge creatures in the deck, so we might as well run it. It counts as a land. Balaged Recovery, got the cool foil here. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Nice little recursion. We don't have a lot of recursion in this deck. We do have the Ewit, but that's about it. So this is a nice way to get some more in there. Valakut Awakening. You can shuffle away your bad cards and draw some other ones. Stomp. Target creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. So nice little pseudo fight effect. I also have the cool foil, and it's an MDFC in our colors, so we're going to run that. And then we have Disciple of Freyalise, 6 mana, 3/3. When it enters, you can sacrifice another creature to gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the creature's power. So sacking our big boys to draw a ton of cards, not too bad. We wouldn't play this if it was just like a 6 mana, 3/3 that wasn't a land. But because it's a land, we are running it. So next up, we'll talk about some of the utility lands. This is Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. I've got the cool buy box promo. Just turns everything into a forest. Nice little mana fixing. Arena of Glory enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain, which we will a lot of the time. It adds 1 red. And then you could tap this and another red to exert it, which means it won't untap next turn, like Glorybringer. And it's going to add 2 red, and it gives that creature haste. So giving our Anzrag and all of our big stuff haste with that is really sweet. Next up, we got Cavern of Souls. You're going to choose a creature type. You can pick Mole. You can pick God. If you're trying to get your commander out with this, God is the better choice to pick because we don't run any other moles. But we do run, I think, 1 other God card. We run Xenagos. I'm just checking the deck real quick to see if we have any other gods. No, we do have Xenagos. And I'm pretty sure that's it for gods. Yep. So when you play that, you're going to name God or you're going to name Mole. But don't name Mole. Name God. Name God. Good words to live by, I guess. If you're really counting on, resolving an Inferno Titan, you can name Giant or whatever. But mostly you're going to name God with that. Next up, we got Soken Zan, Crucible of Defiance. You can discard to make 2 1/1s that gain haste. Super not important, but it's a nice way to get some dorks into play. Forbidden Orchard. This card's kind of funny in the deck. It makes 1 mana of any color, and when you tap it for mana, target opponent gets a 1/1. And in this deck, we thrive on taking a million combats with our opponent having creatures. So, even just giving your creatures away with this and not even using the mana is sometimes worth it. And then we got a bunch of dual lands, so we'll just go through them really fast. This is my longest video so far, so we'll try and speed this up. We got Rockfall Vale, Cinder Glade, Temple of Abandon. I mostly just want to show off how cool all these dual lands are. Commercial District, Timbercrowd Pathway, Spire Garden. Wooded Foothills. Oh, this should have been with the cards that do stuff. We got Besage You. Discard it. Destroy a artifact enchantment on basic land. Firelight Thicket. Stomping Ground. Sheltered Thicket. Command Tower. Foil. Thornspire Verge. This is a brand new card, but it's just a dual land. Rootbound Crag. And Carplusian Forest. So I have a lot of these full art duels. I like Gruul a lot, as you might be able to tell. So I have a ton of those cool duels. And then we run 4 forests because we run Riavi Maya and other ways to, get green into play pretty easily, like Fanatic of Ronus. Yeah. And then we have 5 mountains. So that is the deck. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry it's a little bit long, but hopefully you guys like the longer videos, all 12 of you that are subscribed. And if you are subscribed, I really appreciate it. Trying to keep doing this because it's really fun and satisfying for me to talk about my commander decks. And instead of me just talk about them alone in my basement to myself and my cats, it's nice to be able to talk about them to the camera and, have somebody listen to it. So I really appreciate you guys watching the videos. And, this deck is one of my favorite decks. So I hope you enjoyed the video. And have a great rest of your day.